like to ask a question or make a comment, which is super encouraged, please, this is participatory. This can be as interactive as we want. Just give Thomas a heads up in the back, and he will hand you the second microphone. That way, the people who are joining us online, they can hear your great questions and comments as well. So, to start off, we'll take a bit of a look at what will be on the ballot in August. So just to reiterate, this is an election year, 2026, right? In August, we'll see the primary elections occurring. Then in November, we'll see the general elections occurring. Tonight, mostly we'll talk about what will be happening in the primaries, at least what we know so far. And we'll talk about that too, because the deadline is actually tomorrow. So we could see some last-minute entrance into the field. You never know. But we'll talk a little bit about that. Just for some background, Wyoming is what's called a closed primary state. What this means is that if you are registered with a political party in Wyoming, you can participate in that political party's primary elections. However, if you are an unaffiliated voter, like an independent, or if you're registered with a third party, like the Libertarian Party or the Constitution Party, you can participate in the nonpartisan aspects of the primary, like the 6-penny sales tax questions. We'll talk about that. But you cannot participate in the party's nomination contests. So in those races, it's Democrats voting for other Democrats, Republicans voting for Republicans. And whichever candidates win in the primary elections for that political party, they go on the ballot in November in the general election, and those are the races, the contests we see across parties. So you'll see Democrats versus Republicans. In the primary, it's Republicans versus Republicans, Democrats versus Democrats. So that's just a little bit of background. Every state in the country is so different. Some states also use a closed primary system, but some states will use an open primary system, a semi-closed. There's like an infinite number of options. So I just wanted to give us a heads up about what Wyoming uses. So the first link that I've put here in the slides, and these will go online later too, is the Laramie County Clerk's election webpage. I'll bring that up here. I think this is a great place to start just for general resources about the primary elections and the general elections. They tend to keep this very up to date during the week, during business days. They will update this daily. And this is particularly important in the period that we're in right now. So tomorrow is the deadline for candidates to file for the primary election. It's at 5 p.m., I think, Friday by 5. So even tomorrow, we could see people joining the race up until then. I don't know if anyone will do that at the last second. Maybe everyone we see on the list tonight will be the final list, but it's possible. But they will tell you, the Laramie County Clerk's Office, they'll tell you, they'll keep it up to date. There's some really great links, different pages on this site, gives you some info on how to register to vote, what will be on your ballot. You can also take a look at what your specific ballot will look like, depending on your address. It'll pull up which district you'd be voting in, specifically like for the legislature. So there's some great sources here. I highly recommend checking this out. If you're someone who's interested in campaign finance, you can find all that information here as well. So really good, useful information. The other part of the Laramie County Clerk's website that I wanted to draw your attention to is just the general list of all the offices that will be on the ballot in the primary elections in August. So here we go. The Democratic and Republican parties will nominate candidates for all of these offices. So we have a really interesting mix in this primary election. There are national level offices, races for U.S. Senator, U.S. Representative, people in Congress, right? But there's also going to be these important executive offices, the governor, secretary of state, state auditor, treasurer. Then there's all these different districts, Senate districts, House districts, and tons of important local elections as well. So this is going to be a really packed ballot for sure. As I said before, if you are registered with a political party, or I should say with one of the two major ones, the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, you will be able to vote for your party's candidates for all of these offices. However, if you are unaffiliated or you're registered with another party, the Libertarian Party, Constitution Party, you still have options. So something that is going to be on the primary ballot in August is what we call the 6-penny sales tax in Laramie County. So I tried to break this down. I hope this will be helpful. When I first heard about the 5th penny and the 6th penny, I really thought people were literally talking about a handful of pennies. This made no sense to me. So if you have ever felt confused, you are not alone. It's kind of a confusing way to describe things. But in Wyoming, there's a statewide sales tax of 4%. Doesn't matter which county you're in, that's a statewide tax. Now, Laramie County has added a 5th penny or another 1% sales tax on top of the 4. And that's for general purposes, things that the county commissioners will present that are seen to be kind of essential projects for the community. Then, on top of that, there's a 1% sales tax for voter-approved community projects. This is what we refer to as the 6th penny. And that's the one that will be on the ballot during the primary in August. Interestingly enough, this year, the 5th penny questions will appear on the ballot in November in the general election. So you will all get the chance to weigh in on both the 6th penny and the 5th penny questions. And when you're looking at this part of the ballot, it's really long. It's typically quite long because they're going to tell you about a bunch of different projects that are being proposed. And it's not just in Cheyenne. It's in all the parts of Laramie County, Pine Bluffs, Alvin, right? So you're going to see this super long list of different projects. I'm going to pull up the link here. This is linked, that'll be linked online as well. If you really want to get into the weeds and look at all the projects that are going to be part of the 6th penny, you can do that here. They will describe every project that they're seeking money for, and they'll also categorize it. Infrastructure, public safety, community building, whatever, right? They'll give us some kind of category. So some voters might want to dig into the weeds and see like the specific amount of money that they're requesting for the specific projects. And other voters, it might be enough to just see that it's about infrastructure in the county. Every voter is different. I would say it's fascinating to read through and see which kind of projects are being proposed. Some of them might be things you're super aware of that would affect your everyday life. Then there are other projects that you might not have even known were being proposed. So it can't hurt to take a look. The way this will look on the ballot is that you have the chance to approve as a voter or reject different categories. And again, they've tried to group them kind of by policy area, infrastructure, public safety. But they don't separate it by municipality, which is what they used to do. And you can all probably guess what happened because Cheyenne has the biggest population of all the municipalities in Laramie County. The Cheyenne voters would approve the Cheyenne projects and reject the ones in Pine Bluffs or Alvin or wherever. So that has actually changed in recent years. So now you see all the municipalities together, but the different categories are what it's for, infrastructure, public safety. So they've changed that a little in the hopes that, voters might also consider infrastructure or public safety issues in the smaller municipalities. So they're not always getting rejected from the voters. And this is a unique thing, right? This is very much a direct democracy provision. All of you as voters, you get the chance to say, yes, I want this 1% added to the sales tax in the county to fund all these projects, or no, I don't want that. And something that's also, I think, worth mentioning about the sixth penny, it's a little bit different from the fifth penny and the fourth penny in that it expires. So the sixth penny, it is used to raise money, a specific amount of money for each project that's on the ballot. But once they've collected that amount of money that they need for, a new sewage system or upgrades to the HVAC system or whatever, once they reach that amount, it's done. You go back to a 5% sales tax in Laramie County. And that's actually the situation we're in right now. So the previous sixth penny, which passed in 2021, that one just expired in March because the county collected all the money they needed for all those projects. So for April and May, it's technically been a 5% sales tax in Laramie County. So the question for voters to consider really is, are they okay with it being 6% for a certain period of time until they get the money they need, or are they not okay with that? So how are we feeling? Thoughts, questions? Yes.
Well, I'm from California, and they would have never done this stuff.
Thank you for sharing. That is so good to know.
Yeah.
What a good perspective.
Yeah, because these guys are really good, too.
That's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that because it is a unique way of doing taxation. I don't know that every state and every county does it this way. It's kind of unique.
Okay, this is what LA does. They say, we need some money. Long Beach has some because they wanted to get rid of their oil islands, so they were saving money. And LA's like, how can we get that money from them? That's how it is.
Well, just as a good example, guys, for the sixth penny that's on the August ballot, the new mobile library, which I hope you guys have seen, the beautiful big blue and green mobile library, that was paid for by sixth penny. Yeah. So that's how we as a community got that. There's lots of projects. Yeah, lots of projects are built with the sixth penny.
Yeah, that's a great real life example though too, because I mean here we are in the library using this beautiful space, and this is Laramie County Public Library. It's always good to be reminded.
Let's see. You had said that the sixth penny is temporary. Does the proposal provide any sort of like timeline for that, or is it just like this is the number we're aiming for, and it will be over however much time it takes to get that, or is there we'll have a 6% until this date?
Oh, that is a great question. You know what? My guess is that the county commissioners, they're the ones who put it forward. So probably at their meeting or even on their website, they might actually be able to come up with a projection like that. I'm not sure if it's going to show up on the ballot or even in this voter information guide that they put out. I don't know if they do have that. If you go through and look, they tell you the amount that they want, but that would be a great addition to be like, here's a projection if we had so many people buying things in Laramie County for so many years. It would take 3 years or it would take 5. I mean, that would be amazing. I don't know if they do that, but if they don't, I feel like maybe suggest it to the county commissioners. That's a great idea. That's a great idea. That's genius. That might also give people a sense of the expectations, almost a bit of transparency, right? Like, here's what we think could happen. That's a great idea. Okay. I can show you a couple of other resources, but if you have other questions, don't hesitate to ask. Okay, so another great website to help you make your decisions and even just know what's on the ballot and who's on the ballot is the Wyoming Secretary of State's website. They also keep a running tally of which candidates have entered the race and which political party they're affiliated with. They also try to keep this pretty up to date, particularly Monday through Friday. They tend to update it daily. So the Election Center webpage is one I've got pulled up right here. This will again give us information about the election, the key dates, all of that. Right here, the unofficial primary election candidates roster. That's where we can click to find that up-to-the-moment information about who has officially entered the race and which party they belong to. I'm sorry, I can't get this much larger. I hope we could see a little just for an example. But essentially what this is trying to show is that these are the candidates who have entered the race so far. They've filled out their paperwork correctly. They did the application with the Secretary of State's website. So they've done everything properly, and they are, in fact, registered with the political party that they said they were. Sometimes that happens. You know, people say, I want to run in the Republican primary, and it's like, oh, but you're unaffiliated. So, you know, the Secretary of State and the people who work in that office, they're responsible for going through and making sure that everyone's paperwork is accurate and correct. So just to take a look at the top here as an example, if we're looking at the race for U.S. Senator, one of the people who would represent Wyoming in U.S. Congress, we have a few candidates from the Republican Party and a couple of candidates from the Democratic Party. Now, that deadline to file, it's open till tomorrow at 5. So if we checked back in 24 hours from now, there might be more people, there might not be. This might be, you know, the candidates we see on the ballot. But essentially, these are the people who are going to be on the ballot in August. Again, if you're a Republican, these would be the candidates you see on your ballot. If you're a Democrat, these are the candidates that you'd see on your ballot in August. Then, whoever wins that election, that's going to be the candidate representing that party in the general election in November. That's when we'll see a Democrat versus a Republican. So they try to keep it updated. You know, you can kind of scroll down through, and they'll also tell you the last time they updated it. So just a couple hours ago. That's good. It's good to know. Let's see. Now, one of the races that a lot of people are watching that's kind of been interesting because there's so many candidates is the governor's race, right? So if you want to see, oh, who are the options for people running for governor, you can check that out. All of the executive offices are up. The other thing to note is that this year, all of the House districts for the legislature will be on the ballot. So that's one race you'll for sure see, at least in the general, possibly in the primary, depending on who's running. So for some of the state legislative seats, sometimes you'll just get one candidate from one party running. Typically the incumbent, they had the office before, they're running again, and that's kind of the only option you'll see. But then there's other seats that are more competitive. You might see a few candidates from both parties, or at least one candidate from each party. So it really depends which district you're living in. And on that side note, I just wanted to show you all briefly how you can find which district you're living in. So if you go to the Wyoming State Legislature's website, which is wyoleg.gov, you can scroll down. Oops, no, not that. Okay. You can scroll down a little bit and click on Find My Legislator. I'm just going to use our current location for an example. So this map is trying to show us all of the districts in Wyoming. This tab is on the House. We could also flip it over to the Senate, right? So you can type in your address. It can help you locate which district you're in. And then from there, you can figure out who or which candidates are running to represent that district in the state legislature. So, I mean, one of the, I think, confusing parts about American government is that we have essentially two systems all the time, right? We have the national three branches of government. We have the state three branches of government. Then we also have local governments. And sometimes it's hard to keep track of them, especially in such a packed race like this. People will be voting for the national legislature, the state legislature, possibly a town council or city council or mayor, depending on which municipality you live in. So there's a lot of information to keep track of, which makes things exciting and interesting, but also could be challenging. So just want to check in. How do we feel? Any thoughts or questions so far? Okay, cool. All right. Oh, wait, there was one more thing I wanted to show you all. I knew there was a reason I had this website up. Okay, so if you are ever hoping to run for office yourself, or if you're just curious to see what kind of form do they have to fill out in order to run for office, you can find that information on the Wyoming Secretary of State's website. So if you're ever just curious, you can go through and look at the application. It's online. It'll give you a sense of what kind of information they have to share with the Secretary of State, and then what sort of information that office and the people who work in it would have to verify. And again, this will be open until tomorrow at 5 p.m. So if anyone in the room or online, if anyone wants to run for office, it's not too late. You could still be in the primary elections this year. It's not too late. You could get a campaign going in 24 hours. Crazier things have happened. But I thought that might be something to consider. So I also have some slides about the three branches of government in Wyoming at our state level. But I just want to see if anyone has any questions about the primaries or the general, before, I guess that's a bit of a switching gears topic, but anything we're curious about, any confusions or questions?
Are the justices on the primary?
That is a great question. They are not, no.
Just in general.
Yes, they are considered nonpartisan. I'm not sure if we'll have anyone up for retention. Oh, that's a good question, though. They might be. Oh, I should have checked that out. Ooh. I'll make sure to tell you the next time. Sorry, that's terrible. Yeah, because I don't know if anyone will be up for retention this time around, but they might. There's some newer justices on the bench. Yeah, that one I'll prepare some slides for in our August session. That's a good question. Thank you. Yeah, because that was one of the things I thought we could talk about if we want with the judicial branch is the retention elections and how that works. That's kind of a unique, interesting thing. So here on the slides, we got some photos. This is where you can find the Wyoming State Supreme Court. There's also a great law library in here and what they call the Judicial Learning Center. It's open to the public during regular business hours. Also, members of the public can either observe the court cases, the court sessions, in person or online. And this building is just adjacent to the state legislature, which is right over there. So if you ever want to go and observe the legislative session, that is always encouraged in Wyoming. It's a very accessible legislature and very accessible court system as well. You can pretty much just go in and check out what's happening. So I've got the three branches of government. Thought we would start with the judicial branch. It's such an important branch of government, but maybe it doesn't get as much, I don't know, maybe not as much news coverage, not as much attention as the other two branches. Now, all the information about this branch of government can be found in Article 5 of the Wyoming Constitution. didn't get all my links ready. Sorry, everyone. Okay. So one of the things I wanted to draw your attention to is this opportunity to volunteer as a court navigator. So if you're someone who is fascinated by the legal system, or you want to learn more about it, or gosh, you were thinking maybe about a career in the law, or maybe you just watched a cool legal drama over the weekend and you're like, I'm feeling inspired, I want to learn about this. This is a volunteer program in which people can support people who are going through the court system. You kind of volunteer to be like helping someone navigate the Wyoming court system. It is a relatively new program, a bit of a pilot program, so it might not be around forever, but it is a great way to see up close and personal how the legal system works and what the effects can be for different people depending on which kind of case they're involved in. So that link will be in the slides online if anyone is curious. So Article 5 of the Wyoming Constitution describes most features of this branch of government. However, there are some parts that leave decisions up to the legislature about the courts. And that's always interesting, right, when we see the Wyoming Constitution leaving things up to the legislature, because it means it could change depending on which party or which caucus is in power. That can change with kind of political trends, which is fascinating. Okay, thought maybe we do a bit of brainstorming. Why do we think this court system at the state level might be important? And what do we know about Wyoming's judicial branch of government? And there's no pressure if no one wants to share, so no pressure. Okay, well, shout it out though. If anything comes to you that you want to share, don't hesitate to share it with us. So this is a bit of a chart or a table from one of the textbooks that I used to use to teach Wyoming government. I got rid of it because it was $70 and the students complained it was too much money. So we don't use it anymore. But I took a bunch of screenshots before we got rid of it because there were some good resources in there. This is one of them. I think this is a really nice chart that shows the structure of Wyoming's court system. So this is a three-tiered state court system. It largely mirrors the federal level's three-tiered court system. Very similar in structure and design. At the bottom, we have the circuit courts. All of the misdemeanors start in circuit court. And this is also considered like a small claims court. $50,000 or less, any disputes that involve that kind of level of assets or money, they'll start in the circuit courts. Now, this is a little bit outdated, and I'm sorry about that. This is giving us the number of cases each court viewed in 2018. But to be honest, that number is probably only increased. It's probably not decreased. So in 2018, the circuit courts dealt with 174,029 cases. The circuit court judges and the lawyers, everyone who's involved in that process, it's grueling. It's a lot. It's a lot of work, but really important work. Now, the term for the judges who are circuit court judges is 4 years. And if someone doesn't like the outcome that they get in the circuit court, they do have a chance to appeal to the district court, which is the next level up. So the district court they have unlimited jurisdiction for criminal cases. So if it's like an appeal for a misdemeanor, it could be heard as an appeals case in the district court. Or if it's a civil case that is above $50,000, you could hear that originating in the district courts. The judges, who are district court judges, they have a slightly longer term length. They're serving for 6 years at a time. And the cases, the number of cases that go through that level of the courts are 17,080, at least in 2018. So as we kind of go up, we see the number of cases decrease, right? Because the circuit courts are dealing with a high volume of cases. Then the district courts are dealing with still a high volume of cases, but fewer. And then we get to the top, the Supreme Court. This is the Wyoming State Supreme Court. It's the highest court in the state court system, but if a person didn't like the outcome, or a party, I should say a party, a legal party, if they didn't like the outcome they got in the state court system, they could technically appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court if there's a question about the U.S. Constitution, or if their legal team could connect their case to a constitutional question. But the Supreme Court, they end up hearing a lot of appeals courts, or appeals cases from the district courts. So maybe a party doesn't like the outcome that they got in that court. Their legal team or their lawyer tries to show that there was a procedural error or a point of the law was misapplied. They'll try to get it heard in the Wyoming State Supreme Court. On the Wyoming State Supreme Court's website, you can go through and look at all the cases that they're considering during a session. A lot of them deal with contract law, employment law, tons of family law cases. Some of those are kind of like hard to read through. You got to be ready for those. Some of them are really sad. But there's just a high volume of cases and a lot of different types of cases that are being heard. The Wyoming Supreme Court justices, they have a term that is 8 years long. And the way that they're selected is kind of interesting and unique. At least I've never heard of a state or any unit of government doing it this way. There's a combination of selecting the judges between the governor, so we got a little bit of the executive branch, but also the voters. They get a chance to weigh in. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The other option, that's a newer option, but it could expand to other counties if it goes well in Campbell, Laramie, and Natrona counties, is the treatment and diversion courts. So this is something that is an option for people who are nonviolent offenders who have had really serious mental health issues, and the goal is to get them treatment rather than a more punitive incarceration situation. So, you know, Laramie County is one of 3 in the state that's trying this. I believe the idea for these counties that are trying it is that they're going to present what they've learned after 5 years, and their hope is that other counties would do that if it worked, if it proved useful or beneficial in some way. So the Wyoming State Supreme Court, this one I thought we could focus on a little bit, because sometimes the justices and the state court judges, they are on the ballot in the elections because the voters are half of the equation. They get a role, which, again, so unique. So on the Wyoming State Supreme Court, there are 5 justices. The term for each justice is 8 years, and together they will select someone to serve as the Chief Justice. And the Chief Justice, they give the State of the Judiciary address to the legislature the start of every legislative session. They basically go in, and after the State of the State address, they say, here's the state of the courts in Wyoming. Sometimes they will also have to represent the Wyoming State Supreme Court at official functions. They don't have any extra legal power or power in the court. It's not like they get 3 votes because they're the Chief Justice, but there is some additional duties that come with that responsibility. So in order to even be considered to be a justice, even a thought, even a consideration, first you have to be a lawyer with at least 9 years of experience in the law. You have to be at least 30 years old, a U.S. citizen who has resided in Wyoming for at least 3 years. And this last one is kind of interesting. There's an age ceiling, so the justices have to retire when they reach 70 years of age. Oh, yes.
The 70 years of age, I would believe it was Justice Fox retired. And what happened? Did somebody fill her place, or is there empty till the election, or what happened with that?
That's a great question. I'm so glad you asked. That is my next topic. You read my mind. I love that. Thank you. That was awesome. Yeah. It was like, that was brilliant. Yeah, and I think that's such a good example because it was so recent. So when a vacancy occurs on the Wyoming Supreme Court, there's this interesting process that occurs. First of all, people from across the state are going to send their applications to the Judicial Nominating Commission. And that group is tasked with rigorously examining all the applicants, seriously considering and fairly considering all of them. And it's intense. It's not just an application. I think there's like multiple rounds of interviews. It's a pretty intense process. But from all those people, maybe it's hundreds of people, maybe it's 80 people, every year it's different, or every time they do this, it's different. But the Judicial Nominating Commission, they are responsible for selecting the top 3 candidates from the pool of all the people who applied, and then they send that list of 3 to the governor. Then it's the governor of Wyoming who chooses from that list of 3 and says, this is the one I want. So then that person who's chosen by the Judicial Nominating Commission and the governor, they serve. They're on the bench. This is great. Congrats to them, right? But it's not over. The process isn't over for them. After serving on the court for 1 year, the new justice serves in what's called a retention election. So this is the step in the process where it goes to the voters, and voters get to decide, do we vote yes to retain this judge or justice, meaning yes, we'll keep them on the bench, or vote no, which means we don't want them to stay on the bench. And if the majority of the electorate votes for retention, they'll serve their 8-year term starting, when they're elected, which is kind of interesting. And depending on what age they are when they, get on the bench, they could have multiple retention elections or just one. Kind of depends on where they're at. Then something else that I wanted to show you all, which is kind of cool. I think these elections, the retention elections, it's harder to find information about them because unless, you're directly interacting with that justice, you might not know or have a sense of like, how do I make a decision about this person? How do I know if they're a good justice or not? And one of the resources that's kind of cool is something called the Judicial Performance Assessment Survey. This is a survey that's given out to all of the members of the Wyoming State Bar. And these, you got to remember, these are the folks who are interacting with the justices on a daily basis. They have a close, or at least close proximity to them, more close than, or closer than I think most of us would, right? Unless you are in front of the justice and you've interacted with them in a direct way, most of us really don't know, like, are they good, are they bad, who knows? But it's the folks who are, working with them who do know. So they'll give them ratings, and then they'll publish that information for all of us. So if anyone is ever curious, you can check that out. I've linked it here, I think. Yes, I did. I linked it, yes. So if you're ever curious, you can take a look at the process and see, what happens if there's any issues with, what is it called? Misbehavior, unethical, oh gosh. Oh no, what is it called? Misconduct. Sorry everyone. Lost my words for a second there. And then they also have this interesting page down here. They'll tell you which judges or justices, like which seats essentially are up for consideration, are open. And then so if you are someone who wants to be a judge or a justice, this is where you would start to even learn about the potential job you could apply for. So that's a little bit about that. Yeah. How do we feel? Thoughts, questions? Yes.
We went over the qualifications you brought up were for specifically the Supreme Court, yes? Do you know how those necessarily apply to like the other two? Are they quite as strict, or are there different things that apply to those?
No, that's a great question. Oh, I'm so sorry. Those also apply to the circuit court judges and the district court judges. Oh, I should have made that clear. Yeah. Same quals. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. Oh, the other thing I should have put up was a map. Oh, well. Okay, so I'll just tell you about it. So the state court system has different districts, kind of like the state legislature. Same idea, right? They're trying to apportion districts based on population. But the districts that have a little bit larger population, or maybe are more concentrated population, like down here in Laramie County, will often have more judges than the ones that are less populated. So every part of the state is covered by judicial districts for the circuit courts and the district courts, but it's not completely like even. It's not like every county has the same number of judges, which is sometimes people get mad about that in the less populated areas. Let me put it like that. So that's a complicated thing, I guess, or a contested area. Let's say that. That's a contested one. Yeah, but you know what? For August, I'll make sure to see if there are any judges or justices on the ballot for retention. We can talk a little bit more about that. I'm not sure if anyone will be up this year, but we'll take a look. We'll see. Bit of a side note, although still related. Most of the judges and justices do get retained by the voters in Wyoming. Most people vote yes. And it's pretty rare that you see a judge or justice being rejected, not being retained on the ballot. And a few years ago, I feel bad, I don't remember exactly when, but there was an interesting situation over near Dell Range. There were a few houses that had the lawn signs, and they were very much encouraging people to vote no for a particular judge. Don't retain this judge. And that was the first time, at least for me, that I'd ever seen like a coordinated campaign to encourage people not to retain the person, because most of the time the majority of voters say yes, we'll vote to retain someone. So it's pretty rare that you see that kind of campaign, but it's not impossible. Anything's possible. Okay, so penny for your thoughts. Maybe the sixth penny or the fifth penny for your thoughts. Hey. Yeah, I'm here all week, you guys. No, what do you think about the process for selecting and retaining justices in Wyoming?
I've been remiss in previous elections and not doing much research. On the previous slide that you had for checking on information on that judicial performance assessment, it didn't name a person, so where would you get information on that individual?
Oh, that's a great question. So in the judicial performance assessment, like they do ask about the specific people, judge so-and-so, justice so-and-so, and they're asking all the members of the Wyoming bar to like rate them essentially in different categories. So then they publish the results of that. So it's very interesting. It's kind of like all chunked in one report. So like it's almost like all this information about every judge and every justice ever. What did all the Wyoming bar members think? How did they rate them, you know? And it's different categories, you know, professionalism, integrity, all this different stuff. But it can be overwhelming, I would say. This is a good document to read, but it's also like information overload. It can feel that way too, because you're getting everyone's thoughts about every judge and justice, and you're like, oh. So, but it's a good way because, like you said, I think a lot of voters feel that way. It's like, how do I even know where to find the information? Yeah, at least it's something.
So on the previous slide, if you went onto the site, would you click on that far right option for more information?
Maybe for this one? Ta-da!
There, above, right there, right there.
Okay. So maybe here to see more about the current judge positions that are open?
Oh, that's a good one. And I do know something about her.
Yeah, so this is also a fascinating part of the site to look at because it gives us a little window, a sneak peek into what the process looks like for people who are applying to be a judge or a justice. It's, this is like very much the first step, but it's a long process. A lot of vetting, a lot of interviews. And sometimes, it's interesting. Sometimes people will apply a few times to be either a judge or a justice, and maybe the first couple of times someone else is selected, but you do see that where sometimes there's applicants who keep applying and eventually they do become a Wyoming State Supreme Court justice. It's just a matter of time and patience. So I don't think there's any kind of limit on people applying, multiple times, because we kind of see that. Sometimes people will be, they'll keep going. They're not giving up. They want to be a Wyoming Supreme Court justice.
Thanks.
You're welcome. It's a great question. Know how we are with the time here. We could also talk a little bit about the executive branch and the legislative branch if we want. So all the information about the executive branch can be found in Article 4 of the Wyoming Constitution. So all the three branches of government are kind of nested together in the state constitution, which is useful. It's, Section 3 is the legislative branch, Section 4 is the executive, Section 5 is the judicial branch. So if you're ever curious about, what those branches can and can't do, how they're structured, they're pretty early on in the document, which is helpful. Now, the executive branch in Wyoming is, again, designed in a unique way. I feel like I say this a million times today, but it's true. Wyoming government has some really unique features that you just don't see in other states. Many states in the country will use what's called a governor and lieutenant governor model for their executive branch. And that's largely modeled off of the president and vice president idea, right? They're just kind of copying that, right? But in Wyoming, completely different. There's 5 executive offices, each one separately elected. Their fates are entirely independent. Bless you. And you could technically have people from different parties, right? Because none of them are on the ticket together. They're all separate offices with very different responsibilities. And there's also not a hierarchy, right? So in a lieutenant governor and governor kind of model, it's like the governor's the boss, and the lieutenant governor is like, steps in if there's any problems that the governor can't do, they can't do their job. But in this setup, we have a very equal power-sharing relationship. Each executive office has its own domain, its own responsibilities. And that's kind of unique and cool. I think that it can set the stage for fewer disagreements or fewer, disagreements, fewer power dynamics that could be bizarre. Now, all 5 of these elected officers serve 4-year terms, and they do run with political party affiliations on the ballot. So this primary election, you will see all the officers up for election, particularly if you're registered with the Republican Party. There might even be a couple of options. Some of the offices, we will also see Democratic candidates putting their name forward, but not all of them. And that's something that's a pattern, you know, in Wyoming. It's a very heavily Republican state, so some of the offices you won't even see Democratic candidates even in the primaries, which is fascinating. But anyway, each one serves 4-year terms. There's a little bit of a, I guess, a legal dance with the term limits. So technically, all 5 of the offices are supposed to be term limited to 2 terms. So that'd be like 8 years. But in the past, there have been some legal questions about that, and some of the executive officers have actually challenged that in state court, and the courts sided with them. So I guess the idea is that it's 2 terms, but that's not always upheld in a court of law. So you might end up seeing people serving in executive offices for more than 2 terms, which is kind of fascinating. So the executive branch also encompasses most of the state's bureaucracy. This bureaucratic agency is a government unit established to complete a certain set of objectives. Over 98% of the people who work for Wyoming state government are nested under the executive branch or in the executive branch, and they're doing that crucial work for the state agencies. So, anyone want to guess? What do you think the governor of Wyoming does? What would be some of the job functions or duties? And there's no pressure if no one wants to share. This is just for fun if anyone wants to share, but no pressure. I don't want you guys to feel pressured. Well, if you think of any while we're talking, don't hesitate to flag down Thomas, get the mic, shout it out. So one of the things that the governor can do, they can sign bills into law, or they could reject bills with a veto. In Wyoming, the governor also has what's called line item veto power. So for any bills that deal with the budget, that deal with appropriations of state money, the governor can and does go through that bill with a pen, and they can cross stuff out, or they could add stuff in and say, hey, I'm exercising my line item veto. And then the governor's office will publish a PDF typically on their website for the public to review. They'll say these are the things that the governor used their line item veto for, and then there's typically a letter that explains why. The governor will say this is why I vetoed these things. So that's unique power. The line item veto power is not something that all governors of all U.S. states have. The president doesn't even have it anymore. So the president had it up until the 1990s, and then President Clinton vetoed some money for New York City, and New York City sued and went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court said, no president can ever use that power. So it's a pretty unique power that the governor of Wyoming has. Another thing that the governor can do is issue executive orders. This is something we also see at the federal level, so presidents can issue executive orders. That covers the whole country, but the governor of Wyoming can issue executive orders that cover the whole state. Executive orders, they don't typically have the same weight or force as like a bill that gets turned into a law. They're typically more temporary, but it can give us some clues about that governor's policy preferences, their values, which issues are important to them that they want to bring attention to while they're in office. So they're still useful tools. The governor also has the power to commute sentences and pardon convictions of people who are incarcerated in Wyoming. They also have the power to act as commander-in-chief of the state's military force unless they're being called on by the federal government. So anytime there's a dispute between the federal government and the state government, it's typically the federal government that gets supremacy. Okay, if anyone wants to guess, go for it, but no, again, no pressure. Who or which elected official do you think would act as governor if the governor had to leave office or if they were unable to do their job as governor, even temporarily? Oh, do you have a guess? Oh, yeah. Secretary of State, yes, that's correct, yes, okay, great, awesome. All right, that's awesome. Yeah, so like in a lot of states, it's going to be the lieutenant governor, but in Wyoming, it's the Secretary of State who has an entire job, position to deal with on their own, but they would have to serve as the governor if the governor couldn't do their job. So the Secretary of State has a lot of important job functions, and I think it's worthwhile to think about them, especially during an election year, because they're responsible for overseeing statewide elections, municipal elections, bond elections, special elections, anything that has to do with elections in the state of Wyoming. It's the Secretary of State's office that is across that. They're the ones who get the candidates on the ballot. Remember that application, if you want to be a candidate who's considered in the primary, that's on the Secretary of State's website. All that is going through their office. Any ballot measures, they certify the general election results. They have to work with all the county clerks across Wyoming to make sure that the elections are running smoothly. It's a lot of responsibilities. They're also responsible for registering businesses, new businesses, and any nonprofits in the state. So if any of you would ever want to start a business or a nonprofit, all that paperwork goes through the Secretary of State's office. So the next executive officer up under consideration is the auditor. So the auditor is responsible for serving as the chief comptroller and payroll officer for the whole state of Wyoming. And just so you know, a comptroller is a public official who audits government accounts and certifies expenditures. I know typically when we hear a lot of these words, it's like, oh no, legalese. But this work is so important because they're really making sure that everyone across the state is getting paid on time, that the money is being used for what it is supposed to be used for. If the state has any financial responsibilities to other people, to different entities, to organizations, all of that is the auditor is responsible for all of that. Now, every year they publish the annual comprehensive financial report for the state of Wyoming. That gives a sense of where the public's or where the state's finances are at. They present this to the legislature, and the legislators make decisions based off of that. They publish it for the public as well. So that's interesting information if you're ever curious how the state's doing financially. Then the next one up is the treasurer. So in Wyoming, the treasurer is responsible for the investment of state funds. That's actually the second largest source of income for the whole state of Wyoming. So this is a big job, right? You have to figure out which investments will yield a high return, but won't be so risky that it could bankrupt the state in a day, right? It's a balancing act. You have to really know a lot about the financial services industry. You have to know about investing. They're also responsible for banking, any receipts, any deposits, and they do distribute any federal funds that the state gets. They distribute state funds. This includes the municipalities, the community colleges, UW, anyone that the state is giving money to, they're all over that. And then another interesting job that they have is unclaimed property. So if there's ever a dispute or a question, when someone passes away, like who is their heir, where does their property belong, it is the treasurer's office that investigates that and tries to connect the heir with the property, which is kind of an interesting feature of that position. So last, but certainly not least, is the Superintendent of Public Instruction. This is the 5th executive office for the state of Wyoming. And this is an interesting one because the Wyoming State Constitution actually doesn't have a lot to say about what this position can and can't do. They've left a lot of that up to the legislature. And again, that kind of changes depending on the composition of the legislature. But in general, this is some of the stuff they do. They oversee the K-12 education in the state. However, I would say they don't make curriculum. That's something that the Wyoming Department of Education does. So the Wyoming Department of Education is a state agency. They have quite a lot of power, and they do a lot of work around education in the state. So the Superintendent of Public Instruction, they are responsible for some aspects of public education, but definitely not all the aspects of public education. So they also do things like appointing members to the Wyoming Professional Teaching Standards Board. They maintain a list of accredited schools. They gather reports and statistics that are required by law. They inspect schools if there's any questions about safety or, anything going on in the schools. But again, it's not as clear-cut if you read through this section of the Wyoming Constitution, what they can and can't do. So the legislature can affect that. They've shaped their job duties more even than the Constitution does, which is kind of interesting, more so than the other 4 executive offices. So the last branch, but certainly not least, also super important, the legislative branch of government. All the info about this branch can be found in Article 3 of the Wyoming Constitution. And I think in previous sessions, we've talked a little bit about this branch of government. But again, I think it bears repeating because, as I said at the beginning, during this election cycle, all the House districts in the state legislature will be on the ballot. Many of the Senate districts will also be on the ballot, but for sure all the House districts will, so can't hurt to know a little bit about it. The state legislature is bicameral, so there's 2 houses. There's the Wyoming House of Representatives, which is the lower house, and then the Wyoming Senate, which is the upper house. The Wyoming House has a term length of 2 years, and the Senate has a term length of 4 years. So that's why we see all of the House seats coming up for consideration during this election, because it's every 2 years. It's a constant campaign mode that people who are serving in the House have to be in. The Wyoming Constitution is unique in that it says that this legislature can only meet 60 days every 2 years. So this is a part-time legislature, and they meet in a general session in the odd-numbered years. That's 40 legislative days. And then in the even-numbered years, they convene a budget session, which lasts 20 legislative days. Now, something I wanted to show you all, oh no, maybe I didn't have it up. So if we check out the Wyoming Legislature's website, we are currently in the period that is in between sessions. This is referred to as the interim session. Any of the time in between general sessions is called the interim session. And it might not sound as interesting or exciting as the general or the budget session. However, it's kind of a unique and important time for the legislature, because it's right now that the legislators are deciding which policy issues and which bills that they will introduce when we get to the next official session. So the interim session is a great time for the public to share their input about different policy topics, especially because if there is something you really want to be considered during the next legislative session, this is the time that they're talking about it. Or vice versa. If there's a bill that you really don't want to even show up or be considered, make your voice heard. There are meetings of different legislative committees, both in person and online, that occur during the interim session. Now, there are different standing committees in the legislature that are based on kind of the policy issue or area. The Judiciary Committee, the Appropriations Committee, those are kind of self-explanatory, right? The Appropriations, they're dealing with budget issues. Judiciary, they're dealing with points of law. There's also an Education Committee, a Labor Committee, different committees, and they're going to meet throughout the summer and the fall and talk about which issues should be introduced in the next session. So you can always check out a meeting. Many of them are right here in Cheyenne at the state capitol in the meeting rooms. And if there's a topic on the agenda that you're passionate about, you can go and share your input. They do encourage public input. And vice versa, if there's a topic that's important to you but you don't see it on any of the agendas, you can reach out to your representative or your senator and say, like, hey, this is important to me. I want this subject considered by your committee or by a committee during the interim session. So I think because the legislature isn't in session all the time, it can feel sometimes like we only have this one short moment to make our voices heard when the session is in January and February, in March. But in reality, you can also make your voice heard during the interim session. So if anyone's ever interested in that, just check out the wyoledge.gov website and click on the interim session calendar, and they keep this really updated. So even tomorrow, it's going to look different than it looks today. How do we feel? Thoughts, questions? Alrighty. Well, I've got a few more slides we could take a look at if we want. How a bill becomes a law in the state legislature, or because I know that we have discussed the subject previously, if there's any questions or concerns, things that people want to know specifically, let me know. I want to make sure this is useful for all of you. Okay, well, we could talk about how a bill becomes a law if you want. What do you think? Yeah, okay, cool, all right, great, okay. So, the bills only go through during the general session or during the budget session. But as I said before, the interim session is when they're figuring out which bills to even consider, so it's still important. But the step one is that an idea for a bill has to come from somewhere. And it can come from anyone in Wyoming, an issue you see in your community or in the state, something that concerns you, something that you're enthusiastic about. You can reach out to your representative and say, hey, this is my idea. This is what I think you should do to solve this problem. A lot of the ideas for bills do actually come from residents and voters in Wyoming. And there's a much higher probability of a bill turning into a law in the state legislature than in U.S. Congress. In U.S. Congress, there's only like a 1 or 2% chance that a bill will actually become a law. That's a really tiny chance. In Wyoming, it's 44%. So that means there's a 44% chance that a bill that starts in the legislature could actually become a law in a short period of time, in a matter of weeks. So first, you got to have that idea. Could come from the people, could come from a lobbyist or advocacy organization. It could come from the representative. It could have been developed in a committee during the interim session. That's when a lot of bills are developed. Once the bill is read aloud in the Chamber of Origin, that's when the process really starts officially. So a bill can start either in the Wyoming House or the Wyoming Senate. but it will have to pass all the hurdles in both houses before it can even go to the governor. So in order for the bill to have a real chance, it has to be assigned to a committee. And a 2/3 vote is required during a budget session to get any bills considered that do not directly relate to the budget. So during the general session, that's when we see most of the bills that are about the budget and about other things. But during the budget session, it's really just supposed to be about appropriations. Then the committee hears the bill, and they have a few options. They can pass the bill out of the committee, meaning it goes to the next stage. They can vote to not pass the bill. They can pass it with amendments, or they could return it with recommendations for whoever sponsored the bill. And if they made those recommendations, the idea would be that they would vote to approve it. Then the members in the Chamber of Origin, they debate that bill for the first time, but there's multiple chances and cycles for a bill to be debated, but this is the first chance to debate the bill. Then it goes back to the Committee of the Whole, which is what we call the meetings of the House and the Senate together when they're all in session together, and they have to vote to support or oppose it. So let's say the majority of the House members, they're like, yeah, we support this bill. Then the bill is debated even more. It has to have at least 3 readings, in each house. So the process isn't quite over. But if it can make it through all those hurdles, and you get the majority of the legislators in that chamber voting to approve the bill, then it starts all over again in the next chamber. So if it starts in the Wyoming House, it then moves to the Wyoming Senate, or vice versa. A bill could start in either house. If it's passed by the second chamber with no changes, the bill is sent directly to the governor, either for their signature or their veto. And again, if it's a budget bill, they could use the line item veto too, which is kind of cool. If the Senate and the House versions of the bill differ, which they most often do, then a joint conference committee is appointed to reconcile the differences. And a joint conference committee has members of the House and members of the Senate. They're working together to compromise, essentially to negotiate and figure out which version of the bill could we all live with. Then that version of the bill is the one that gets sent to the governor. It's not, they can't send a bill that has 2 different versions, right? That wouldn't be very good. So it's that one that comes out of that committee work. Then the governor can either sign the bill into law, veto the bill. The bill can also become law without the governor's signature. The legislature has the power to override the governor's veto with a 2/3 vote, but that's hard to do. I mean, that's like a super majority, right? It's not just 51% at that point. It's a 2/3 majority, but it's possible. And if the legislature and the governor are very different, if they have different values or policy priorities, then it's possible for that to happen. But it's tricky. It's a bigger hurdle. So the committee work is a big part of the legislator's job, particularly now during the interim session. They're meeting in their committees, they're listening to the public, they're drafting their bills, and the Wyoming legislature has 12 permanent parallel standing committees. Oh, I forgot to click on my link. This is the link that shows all of the different committees in the Wyoming State Legislature. The Judiciary Committee and the Appropriations Committee are 2 of the more powerful committees, but they're all important. They all do really important work. And the way that people get chosen for these committees is very much dependent on which political party is in power and how that party apportions those committee seats and those leadership seats. So if the controlling party, the dominant party, is the Republican Party, it's that party that gets to choose, the leadership for that legislative body, also committee leadership, and make committee assignments. So it's always advantageous for whichever party is holding more seats in the legislature. They get to control a lot of the committees. these are all important committees. They all do crucial work, especially during the interim session. And you can click on any link, like let's just look at the education one for an example, and you can see all of the people who are, oh, I don't know why it's in 2022. No, we want this year. Okay, for 2026, you can see all of the meetings. You can also see all of the members of that committee. So if you ever wanted to reach out to them about a specific bill or a policy issue, you would know. And it's always interesting when you find out the people who are representing your district are, serving on that committee. That's always the best way to go if you want to get their attention, because you can say, honestly, hey, I'm a voter in your district. You represent me, and I care about this bill that you're considering in your committee. So there's a lot of interesting information here. They'll tell you typically straight out which issues they're considering during the interim session and what their approach is. So this is some of the stuff that the Education Committee will be looking at. Virtual education, dual and concurrent programs, educational basket of goods, artificial intelligence in education. Wow, just a lot of fascinating subjects that they'll be thinking about. So the WyoEdge website, this one here, I think this is a great resource. Anything you really want or need to know about the legislature, you can typically find here. And I would say the public information officers who work for the legislature, they are so smart and so responsive to the public. So if you have questions ever about the process or about how to contact your legislator or how to figure out which district you're in, you can always reach out to them. You could just walk into the Capitol and ask them, or you could call them or email them. They're really very accessible, and they want to help. They want to help. So I would say with our last branch of government, especially because we're here in Cheyenne where the Capitol is, there's a lot of opportunities to either observe the process or even be part of it. So any thoughts or questions or? I think my time is coming to a close. But thank you all so much for coming out tonight, for listening and participating.
Thank you so much. I've learned so much tonight.
So glad. Thank you.
Yes, please thank Lily one more time for me. So we're about to take a 2-month hiatus, okay, over the summer, because July, you guys know, June, July gets really busy. But we are going to be back Thursday, August 6th. Same time, same channel, same location, okay? But that one is going to be possibly the most, I don't know, what's the word I want? It's probably going to be the most interesting because it's going to be 2 weeks before the primary, okay? And Lily is going to give you guys awesome information on who's running, where they're from, possibly, what information you need to help formulate your vote in the primaries, okay? So, Thursday, August 6th, 6 p.m. right here, okay? All right, thank you guys so much.